My name is Jessica Morgan, and I'm 27 years old. If you ask most people in my family, they tell you I'm the difficult one. The girl who never followed the rules, who never lived up to expectations. But that's not the truth. The truth is, I followed rules so strictly, so painfully, that I nearly lost myself in the process. The rules of the United States Army. I enlisted right after college, when I was 22. My friends thought I was crazy. My mother cried. My father, a retired contractor who loved to call himself old school, told me I'd never last. "You're soft, Jess," he said over breakfast the morning I signed the paperwork. "You can't handle grit. You're not cut out for that kind of life." Those words lit a fire inside me. I didn't join to prove him wrong, but once he said them, I wanted to prove to myself that he didn't know me at all. The army was brutal. The first weeks were a blur of blistered feet, mud caked in my hair, and the constant scream of drill sergeants drilling into my skull. There were nights I lay in my bunk with every muscle trembling, too sore even to cry. I missed birthdays, family gatherings, and the simple comfort of silence. But I didn't quit. I kept my head down. I pushed harder. When my body begged me to stop, I told myself, just one more step, one more push-up, one more mile. And you know what? I made it. I became part of something bigger than myself. I carried the flag on my shoulder and the weight of responsibility in my chest. I learned discipline, sacrifice, loyalty. These things reshaped me, carved me into someone stronger. But none of that mattered to my father. The first time I came home on leave, I expected pride, maybe even a smile. Instead, Dad looked me up and down in my uniform and smirked. "So, they didn't kick you out yet?" he said. Mom rushed in with a hug, trying to cover the sting, but the damage was already there. To him, I was still a fragile girl playing soldier. That became the theme of every homecoming. He'd ask loaded questions at family dinners. "So, Jess, did you actually do anything over there or just shuffle papers? Or, bet you can't wait to get out and live a normal life again, huh?" He spoke as though my years of service were a temporary hobby, not a sacrifice. What made it worse was the silence of my siblings. My younger brother, Ryan, would chuckle under his breath. My older sister, Melanie, would roll her eyes and change the subject. Nobody defended me. Not once. And so, when Melanie's wedding day came, I should have known better than to expect anything different. The ceremony was beautiful, rose petals scattered across the aisle, a string quartet, sunlight spilling through stained glass windows. I sat near the front, my uniform pressed and immaculate. I wore it not to draw attention, but because it was the one thing I was most proud of. During the vows, I felt my throat tighten. Watching Melanie, radiant and smiling, I couldn't help but remember the little girl who used to braid my hair at night and whisper secrets under the covers. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped looking at me as her sister and started looking at me as an outsider. But the moment that would be burned into my memory forever didn't come until the reception. The hall was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and music. I sat at a round table with distant relatives, my fork tracing idle patterns on the plate of untouched chicken in front of me. That's when the DJ handed the microphone to my dad. He stood up, swaying slightly from the whiskey already in his system, and grinned. "I just want to say how proud I am of my little girl Melanie," he began. Cheers erupted. He raised his glass. "She's everything a father could want in a daughter. Smart, beautiful, kind." He turned, his eyes landing on me. His grin widened into something cruel. "Not like Jessica over there. She tried to hack military life, but couldn't quite manage, could ya, Jess?" Laughter bubbled around the table. Some people laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Others laughed outright, emboldened by his tone. My heart stopped. My hands froze around the fork. Heat rose in my chest, but it wasn't shame, it was rage. I wanted to stand up and scream that he had no idea what I endured, that I had survived nights of mortar fire, days of blistering heat, endless drills that broke stronger men than me, that I had given years of my life to serve a country he only ever complained about paying taxes to. But my mouth stayed shut. My body was stone. And then something happened that no one expected. The groom, Ethan, who was in the Navy, pushed back his chair. The room quieted. He looked directly at me, his eyes steady, his face unreadable. Then he raised his hand, sharp and precise, and gave me a full, formal salute. The room went silent. My father blinked, startled. My mother's eyes filled with tears. For one breathless moment, I felt seen, acknowledged, respected. I returned the salute, my hand trembling. And though I lowered it quickly, that gesture etched itself into my soul. Because in that instant, I wasn't a failure. I wasn't my father's disappointment. I was a soldier, recognized by another soldier. But as the music picked back up and the laughter slowly returned, my rage only grew. Because respect from a stranger could never erase the betrayal of my own blood. That night, lying in the guest room of my parents' house, I stared at the ceiling with my fists clenched. My father's words echoed in my head like a drumbeat. She couldn't hack military life. He didn't know it yet, but those words were the beginning of a storm. And storms don't pass quietly. The morning after the wedding, I woke to the sound of clattering pans and muffled voices downstairs. My head throbbed from lack of sleep. I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol the night before, but the words my father had spat out in front of everyone were enough to poison me. I dragged myself out of bed and splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom mirror. My reflection stared back at me, dark circles under my eyes, jaw clenched tight, the faint outline of tan lines from endless hours in the sun during drills. My uniform hung neatly on the back of a chair, still crisp, still perfect. But to my father, it was just a costume. When I stepped into the kitchen, Mom was at the stove, flipping pancakes. Ryan scrolled on his phone at the counter. Dad sat in his usual chair, a mug of coffee in one hand, the newspaper in the other. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "Morning," I said, my voice flat. Mom turned, forcing a bright smile. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep okay?" I wanted to tell her no, that I lay awake replaying the humiliation of last night. But I didn't. I just shrugged. Ryan glanced up from his phone. "So, Jess, how long are you in town this time?" "A week." 2. 3 days, I replied. "I've got to be back on base Monday." Dad snorted into his coffee. "What's the rush? Not like you're on the front lines." The words cut sharp. I gritted my teeth. "You don't know where I've been or what I've done, Dad." That finally made him lower the newspaper. His eyes met mine, cold and dismissive. "I know enough. You joined up to play tough, but everyone knows women don't last long in the military. They get soft or they get out." "Stop it, Frank," Mom said sharply, but her voice shook. I stared at him, heat crawling up my neck. "I've lasted 5 years. I've outlasted men who broke after one. But you've never cared about that, have you?" He set the mug down with a thud. "You think serving makes you better than us? Than me? You're still just a girl trying to prove a point." Silence fell over the kitchen. Mom flipped a pancake, too hard, and it tore. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. My chest ached, but I refused to let him see me crumble. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and walked out. The crisp autumn air hit my face as I stepped into the yard. I sucked in a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The small town where I grew up looked exactly the same cracked sidewalks, same oak tree leaning over the fence line, same neighbors waving from across the street. Yet I felt like a stranger here. I ended up at the park I used to escape to as a teenager. I sat on the swings, gripping the chains, letting the cool wind brush against my skin. My thoughts spun. Why did his words still matter? Why did I crave his approval after years of being dismissed? Because he was my father. And no matter how old you are, some part of you still wants your parents to say, "I'm proud of you." But he never would. The only thing keeping me sane was remembering Ethan's salute. That single gesture had carried more weight than all the empty words my father had thrown at me in 27 years. Ethan saw me. He understood. Later that afternoon, Melanie called. "Jess," she said, her voice hesitant. "I wanted to check in. About last night." I swallowed hard. What about it? You know Dad, he drinks, he runs his mouth. He didn't mean it. Didn't mean it? I snapped. He humiliated me in front of everyone, Mel. He turned my service into a joke. I know, she sighed. But it was my wedding day. I didn't want to start a scene. Ethan tried to show respect. He did more than anyone else in that room. I cut in. He was the only one who stood up for me. Melanie was quiet for a moment. Jess, I love you, but maybe you need to stop expecting Dad to change. He is who he is. Don't let him ruin things for you. Her words stung because they were true. Expecting Dad to suddenly see me differently was like waiting for the tide to stop moving. But the hurt didn't just vanish. When we hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the wall. A thought crept in, one I'd pushed away for years. What if I stopped trying altogether? What if I walked away from this family? The idea terrified me, and yet it also felt like freedom. That night, as I lay in bed, I pulled out an old notebook I kept in my duffel bag. Inside were letters I'd written to myself during deployments. Words scrawled in the dark, reminders to keep going when everything felt impossible. Day 46, feet bleeding, but I didn't stop. I won't stop. Day 79, missed Christmas again. But I'm alive. That's enough. Day 102, they said I couldn't do it. But I'm still here. I read those words until my eyes blurred. Each page was proof. Proof that I was stronger than my father's mockery. Proof that his laughter didn't define me. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that one day, somehow, I would need to show him. Not with words, not with arguments, but with something undeniable. Something that would silence him. The next morning, I dressed in civilian clothes and joined Mom on the porch for coffee. She looked tired, her eyes puffy from crying. Jess, she said softly, you know he doesn't mean to hurt you. I sipped the bitter coffee, staring out at the street. He does, Mom. And he enjoys it. That's the difference. She sighed. He's proud in his own way. He just doesn't know how to show it. I turned to her, anger bubbling. Proud? He humiliated me in front of 100 people. You think that's pride? Her hands trembled around her mug. She didn't answer. And in that silence, I realized something. My father wasn't going to change. My mother wasn't going to fight him. My siblings weren't going to defend me. I was alone. But alone didn't mean powerless. The army had taught me to survive without applause, to thrive without approval. I didn't need my father's validation. What I needed was to stop giving him the power to wound me. That evening, I packed my duffel bag. As I zipped it shut, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't leaving home broken, I was leaving clear. I slipped out without saying goodbye. The bus ride back to base was long, the sky turning from pale gold to deep navy outside the window. But inside me, something had shifted. His words, she couldn't hack military life, no longer echoed as truth. They rang as a challenge. And challenges? I didn't run from them. I met them head-on. What I didn't know yet was that life was about to hand me an opportunity. One that would force me to choose. Walk away quietly from a shadow forever, or finally stand in the light, unshaken, undeniable. And when that moment came, I would no longer be the daughter he laughed at. I would be the soldier he could never ignore. Back on base, everything felt sharper, louder, more alive than before. The clanging of weights in the gym, the cadence of boots on asphalt, the whistle of drills, it all struck my chest with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For once, I wasn't dragging the weight of home on my shoulders. I had left it behind, along with the bitterness of trying to make my father see me. But even as I tried to bury it, his words clung to me. She couldn't hack military life. They whispered when I laced up my boots, when I ran until my lungs burned, when I lay on my bunk staring at the ceiling. They weren't chains anymore, they were fuel. And I was about to need every drop of that fuel. Our unit was prepping for a specialized training program, one that only a handful of soldiers got selected for. It was grueling, advanced tactical work that demanded not just strength, but mental grit. When my commanding officer, Captain Harris, posted the roster on the bulletin board, I scanned the list with my heart hammering. There it was. Morgan, Jessica. I wanted to scream, to cry, to call anyone to tell them I had made it. But instead, I clenched my jaw and nodded to myself. Because joy wasn't safe. Pride wasn't safe. Not when my father's voice still lingered in my head. Training began at dawn 2 days later. We were dropped into forests with 60-pound rucksacks and told to navigate back to base with nothing but a compass and grit. We were forced to rappel down cliffs, crawl through mud under live fire, and endure sleep deprivation so intense that the lines between dream and reality blurred. There were times my body screamed to quit. Once, during a nighttime march, my legs buckled. I collapsed in the dirt, face pressed to the earth, every muscle trembling. A fellow trainee muttered, "She's done." And maybe they thought I was. Maybe even a part of me did. But I remembered Dad's laugh at the reception hall. I remembered the humiliation burning through me like acid. And I pushed myself up, teeth grit, one foot in front of the other, until the dawn painted the horizon. By the end of the program, nearly a third of the group had dropped out. But not me. Captain Harris shook my hand on graduation day. "Morgan," he said, his tone respectful, "you've got grit. You didn't just survive, you led." Those words hit deeper than I expected. They weren't just acknowledgement. They were proof. Proof that I wasn't the weak link my father wanted me to believe I was. Still, the victory felt hollow. Because what good was proving myself to strangers when the one man I had spent my whole life trying to impress would never admit it? It was around that time that Ethan, the groom who had saluted me at Melanie's wedding, reached out. He sent a message on social media, simple and direct. I meant that salute. It wasn't for show. I've got nothing but respect for what you've done. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Thank you. You have no idea how much that meant to me that night." We started talking. Slowly at first, about military life, deployments, and the odd balance of pride and exhaustion. Ethan understood things my own family never could. He knew the sting of missing holidays, the silence of nights away from home, the quiet satisfaction of pushing through when nobody believed in you. Our conversations became a lifeline. Not romantic. He was married to my sister, after all, but honest. Raw. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't carrying my story alone. Months passed. Training turned into new assignments, new responsibilities. I rose through the ranks faster than I expected, each step a little louder, a little bolder. My confidence grew, but so did the ache inside me. Because no matter what I achieved, home was still a wound that hadn't healed. Then came the call. Mom's voice trembled through the phone. "Jess, your father's not well. The doctor says his heart's failing." I froze. My father, so loud, so unshakable, so cruel, suddenly fragile? The thought twisted something deep inside me. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," Mom whispered. "But maybe you should come. Just come see him." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to slam the phone down, to let him face the end with nothing but the echo of his own laughter for comfort. But another part, the little girl who once braided her sister's hair, who once believed home meant safety, couldn't let go that easily. So I went. Walking into that hospital room was like stepping into another world. Dad lay in the bed, thinner than I'd ever seen him, tubes running from his arms, monitors beeping softly. His skin was pale, his lips cracked. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his cruelty had evaporated with his strength. He turned his head when I entered. For a moment, his eyes lit with something like surprise. Then they narrowed. "Jessica," he rasped. "Still playing soldier?" The words landed heavy. Even on his deathbed, he couldn't resist. I wanted to scream, to walk out, to never come back. But I stayed rooted to the spot, my fists clenched at my sides. "You don't change, do you?" I said quietly. He coughed, a weak laugh rattling in his chest. "You think you proved something out there? You think anyone will remember?" I swallowed hard. My chest ached. But for the first time, I didn't feel crushed. I felt free. Because I realized in that moment that his words no longer had the power to define me. He was a bitter man staring at the end, clinging to the only weapon he ever had, his tongue. And me? I was still standing, still living, still strong. I leaned closer, my voice steady. I don't need you to be proud of me. I'm proud of myself. That's enough. For once, he had no comeback. He just stared at me, eyes clouded with something I couldn't name. Anger, maybe regret, maybe both. I left the hospital that night with a strange sense of peace. Not because things were fixed, they weren't, but because I had finally understood I would never get the father I wanted. But I had already become the woman I needed to be. What I didn't know was that this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a reckoning. Because sometimes, betrayal doesn't end when the words stop. Sometimes, it digs deeper, waiting to be unearthed when you least expect it. And for me, that moment was coming. After leaving the hospital that night, I thought I had closed a chapter. I thought confronting my father, telling him I didn't need his pride anymore, was the end of his hold on me. But life doesn't tie things up neatly, not when betrayal has roots that go deeper than words. It was a week later when Mom called again. Her voice cracked through the line. "Jess, your father's gone." The silence that followed was suffocating. I should have felt something, grief, anger, relief. Instead, I felt nothing. Just a hollow space where his voice used to live. The funeral was small, held in the same church where Melanie had been married. I wore a black dress, not my uniform. I didn't want his friends, those old drinking buddies of his, men who'd never lifted more than a hammer in their lives, to see me as a symbol. I wanted to blend into the background, to keep the storm inside me private. After the service, as people lingered in the hall, Melanie pulled me aside. "Jess, there's something you need to know." Her face was pale, her hands twisting together. I frowned. "What is it?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Dad left paperwork. The lawyer wants us to meet tomorrow." I shrugged. "Fine. I don't want anything from him." But the next day, sitting in that lawyer's office with Melanie and Ryan, I realized it wasn't about wanting. It was about what he had taken. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Your father's estate is modest, but there are assets. The house, some savings," and he paused, flipping through pages. "A military pension." My head snapped up. "What pension? Dad wasn't military." The lawyer looked surprised. "He signed off years ago on survivor benefits tied to your grandfather's service. He's been receiving them since your grandfather's death." I blinked, the words not registering. "My grandfather served?" Ryan shrugged. "Yeah, World War II. I thought you knew." I shook my head. Nobody had ever told me. Not once. The lawyer continued. "As the eldest son, your father was the primary beneficiary. When he passed, he had the option to name a successor. He chose Ryan." The air drained from the room. My ears rang. "Wait," I said, my voice sharp. "He could have named me? He could have given me something that actually honored service? And he didn't." The lawyer gave a small, apologetic nod. "I'm afraid that's correct." My chest burned. My father had mocked me for serving, laughed at me for wearing the uniform, yet all those years, he was cashing checks tied to a legacy of service in this family. And when given the chance to pass it on to the one person who had actually chosen the military, he gave it to my brother. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Jess, don't make this a thing. It's just money. Just money." My voice cracked. "Do you know what that represents? Do you know how many nights I lay in the dirt, bleeding, aching, wondering if I was strong enough to keep going? That pension wasn't his, it was Granddad's. And he used it to line his pockets while laughing at me." Melanie reached for my arm, but I pulled away. My whole body shook with rage. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing my father's face, hearing his laugh, but now it was tangled with something worse, hypocrisy. He had ridiculed me for the very life he was secretly profiting from. I wanted to scream, to burn every photo of him I could find. But anger alone wasn't enough. I needed something more. The next day, I dug through boxes in Mom's attic, searching for any trace of my grandfather's service. Medals, photos, letters, anything. Hours passed before I found it. An old trunk, heavy and dust-covered, shoved behind holiday decorations. Inside were treasures. A faded uniform jacket with patches still clinging to the fabric. A stack of letters written in careful script. Metals dulled by time, but still shining with honor. I sat on the attic floor, tears streaming down my face as I held the jacket to my chest. My grandfather had served. He had carried the same weight I had chosen to carry. And my father had hidden it from me. One letter in particular gutted me. To my son Frank, it read, "I hope one day you'll understand what this uniform means. It's not about pride or medals. It's about sacrifice. If you ever have children, teach them this. Let them know we come from people who serve." I sobbed, clutching the paper. My grandfather had wanted his legacy passed down. Instead, my father had buried it. And now, it was Ryan who held the pension, the money, the symbolic tie to a service he would never understand. It wasn't about the dollars. It was about justice. About reclaiming something that should have been mine. That weekend, I drove out to the cemetery where my grandfather was buried. The grass was trimmed, the headstone simple. I knelt, running my fingers over his name. "I didn't know," I whispered. "But I do now. And I promise you I'll honor this. I won't let Dad's lies be the last word." The wind rustled the trees, almost like a response. From that day, a plan began to form. I didn't know if it would be revenge or redemption, but I knew one thing. I would not stay silent anymore. When I returned to base, I told Captain Harris everything. About my grandfather, about my father's betrayal, about the pension stolen from me. He listened quietly, his jaw tight. "You've carried more than your share, Morgan," he said finally. "But maybe it's time you tell your story. Loudly. Not for your father, not even for your family. For yourself. For every woman who's been laughed at for serving." His words stuck with me. Tell my story. And slowly, the idea grew. I began writing. Late at night, after drills, after duties, I filled notebooks with memories of mud, of fire, of loneliness, of strength. I wrote about my father's laughter, the Groom salute, the silence of my siblings. I wrote about my grandfather's words, begging for a legacy to live on. The pages piled up, and with every word, I felt lighter, stronger. But deep down, I still craved something more, something sharper. Because writing might heal me, but I wanted the world to know who my father really was. I wanted to tear down the mask he'd worn his whole life. And that chance was closer than I realized. One evening, scrolling online, I stumbled across a local newspaper headline. "Community honors late Frank Morgan for dedication to family." I froze. My father's photo grinned back at me, the article filled with quotes about his strength and legacy. Legacy. The word curdled in my stomach. He didn't deserve that word. He didn't deserve the medals in that trunk or the pension he stole. I stared at the screen, trembling. My family might have chosen silence, but I still had my voice. And for the first time, I was ready to use it. The article burned in my hands like fire. Community honors late Frank Morgan for dedication to family. The headline mocked me, every word dripping with falsehood. I read it over and over until the letters blurred. They were praising the man who had humiliated me, who had pocketed a pension never meant for him, who had laughed at my service while secretly living off the legacy of someone who had worn the same uniform I did. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let his lies be written into history. I wasn't going to let his obituary become the final word on his life, while my truth was shoved into silence. So I wrote. At first, it was just a long, furious post on my social media page. I typed late into the night, the glow of the screen lighting my face as my fingers flew. My father was not the man you think he was. At his funeral, people called him strong, loyal, dedicated. But the truth is he mocked his own daughter for serving her country, even while cashing checks tied to the service of his father, my grandfather, who fought in World War II. He never told me about that legacy, never honored it, never respected it. Instead, he laughed at me in front of 100 people, saying I couldn't hack military life. I am here to say I did hack it. I lived it. I bled for it. And while my father may have taken the pension, I will carry the honor. I didn't plan for it to spread, but it did. By morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Comments, shares, messages from strangers. Some were cruel, calling me bitter, disrespectful, airing dirty laundry. But many more were kind. Veterans wrote, "I believe you. I've been there too." Women in uniform sent me messages. "Thank you for saying what we can't." Even a few old-timers who had served with my grandfather's unit wrote to me, telling stories about his bravery, confirming the legacy I had only just discovered. It was overwhelming.
Terrifying.
And yet it was the first time I felt like my voice was louder than his laugh. But not everyone was happy. Melanie called me first. Her voice was sharp, brittle. "Jess, what the hell are you doing?" "Telling the truth," I said. "You're dragging Dad's name through the mud." "He did that himself," I shot back. "I'm just refusing to cover it up anymore." "Jess, he's gone. He can't defend himself." And neither could I at that reception. Neither could Granddad when Dad buried his service under silence. Don't you get it? This isn't about revenge. It's about taking back what he stole. Melanie sighed, exasperated. "You always have to make everything about you." Her words stung, but I didn't argue. Because deep down I knew it wasn't just about me. It was about every soldier who'd been laughed at by their own families. It was about legacies buried under shame. Ryan's reaction was worse. He showed up at my door one evening, face red, fists clenched. "You need to take that down.
Now."
I stood my ground.
"No."
"You're humiliating us. Do you even realize how this makes Mom look? How it makes me look? You think this is about appearances?" I snapped. "You're sitting on a pension you don't deserve, Ryan. Money tied to service you never gave, a uniform you never wore. And you're mad at me for saying the truth out loud." His jaw tightened. "Dad chose me."
"Not you."
"Maybe he knew you'd pull something like this." That was the final crack. My hands shook as I pointed toward the door. "Get out." He left, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. I sank to the floor afterward, trembling, tears spilling down my face. Every line I crossed with my family felt like I was severing ties I'd once believed unbreakable. But every tie I cut also made me lighter. Still, part of me wondered, was I going too far? Was I destroying my family's memory for the sake of my own pain? Those doubts gnawed at me until the letter arrived. It was from a woman named Ruth, 92 years old, who had been a nurse in my grandfather's unit during the war. "Jessica," it began in shaky handwriting, "I saw your post. I knew your grandfather. He was brave and kind. He used to talk about his son, Frank, with such hope. He wanted him to understand what honor meant. I'm sorry to hear that didn't happen. But I want you to know, you are the one carrying his spirit now. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I pressed the letter to my chest, sobbing. That was the proof I needed. I wasn't tarnishing a legacy. I was reviving it. From that moment, I doubled down. I reached out to veteran organizations, sharing my story. I wrote articles, spoke on podcasts, even stood at a local event honoring women in service, and told the truth about the laughter at that wedding, the humiliation, the betrayal. Each time, my voice grew steadier, stronger. And the more I spoke, the more people listened. Of course, my family distanced themselves. Ryan stopped answering my calls. Melanie sent short, clipped texts. Even Mom, sweet and quiet, stopped inviting me home for holidays. It hurt more than I admitted, but I told myself it was the price of truth. Then one evening, scrolling online, I stumbled on a video. Someone had filmed me at the veterans event, telling the story of Ethan's salute after my father's cruel toast. The video had gone viral, millions of views, thousands of comments. And there, buried in the comments, was one that stopped me cold. I was at that wedding. I saw it happen. She's telling the truth. For the first time, the humiliation that had haunted me for years wasn't just my memory. It was witnessed. It was real. The next day, Ethan messaged me again. "Jess, I saw the video. I want you to know, I still stand by that salute. Always will. I cried reading those words. Because in the end, maybe that was enough. Not my father's pride, not my family's approval. Just one salute. One acknowledgement that I had hacked it, survived it, lived it. But something inside me still burned. Because Ryan was still sitting on that pension. And as long as he held it, the legacy wasn't fully mine. I wasn't sure yet how, but I knew this. I was going to take it back. One way or another. The decision gnawed at me every night. I had spoken the truth. I had carried my grandfather's honor back into the light. But as long as Ryan kept that pension, money that symbolized everything my father had hidden, there was unfinished business. It wasn't greed. God knows I didn't need the money. I had my salary, my career, my future. But that pension wasn't just a check. It was a symbol, the last tangible thread connecting me to the grandfather I never got to know, and to the service that shaped me. And it had been handed to someone who mocked my choices, who had never carried a pack, never saluted a flag, never bled on foreign soil. I couldn't let it stand. So I started researching. Late nights on my laptop, coffee going cold beside me, I dove into military pension laws, survivor benefits, inheritance clauses. I pored over legal documents until the words blurred. Most of it was clear. Dad had chosen Ryan as a successor, and the system rarely allowed changes once the paperwork was filed. But there was something else. Buried in the regulations was a clause. If evidence could be shown that a beneficiary was unfit, or if fraud or misrepresentation was involved, the designation could be contested.
Fraud.
The word stuck to me like glue. My father had taken those checks under the guise of honoring his father's service. But he had never told us. He had hidden it, used it, mocked me while spending it. Could that qualify as misrepresentation? Maybe not legally. But morally? Absolutely. I needed more proof. So I went back to the trunk. The letters inside, the uniform, the medals, they were my grandfather's voice. And the more I read, the clearer it became. He had wanted his service honored, not exploited. In one letter he wrote, "I hope you pass this on. Not the money, the meaning. Tell them what it cost us, what it gave us." Tears blurred my vision as I whispered to the empty attic, "I will. I swear I will." I made copies of everything. The letters, the service records, the pension documents. I built a file thicker than a novel. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Danielle Price, a veteran herself who had transitioned into law. I slid the folder across her desk, my hands trembling. "I don't want the money," I told her. "I want the truth. I want to show that it should have gone to someone who actually understood what it meant." She read in silence, flipping through the papers. Finally, she looked up. "You got a case, not a guaranteed one, but a case. At the very least, you could force a hearing. You'll take heat for it, though. Families hate when dirty laundry goes public." I nodded. "I've already lost my family. What's left to lose?" The petition was filed within weeks. Word spread fast. Ryan called me in a rage. "You're insane," he shouted. "You're dragging this through the courts? Over what? Pride? Over truth," I said coldly. "You don't get to sit on Granddad's honor while mocking my service. Not anymore. You're tearing this family apart." "No," I snapped. "Dad did that. I'm just refusing to play along." When I hung up, my hands shook. But beneath the fear was steel. The hearing was set for spring. I walked into that courthouse in full uniform, my medals polished, my hair tight against my scalp. Ryan sat on the other side with his lawyer, smug and dismissive. Mom sat in the back, wringing her hands. Melanie didn't come at all. The judge looked weary, as if this was just another family squabble. But when Danielle stood and began laying out the evidence, my grandfather's letters, the pension history, the testimony from Ruth and other veterans who had known him, the room shifted. Then it was my turn. I stood, my knees trembling but my voice steady. "Your Honor, this isn't about money. This is about a man who mocked the very service he lived off of. This is about a legacy buried in silence, while the only person in this family who chose the uniform was laughed at for it. My grandfather asked that his service be honored. I am asking you to let me honor it. That's all." For a moment, The room was silent. Ryan scoffed. She's making this about herself. Dad chose me. That's the end of it. The judge frowned, tapping his pen. It's not that simple. The question is whether the beneficiary designation was made in good faith and whether the legacy of service was intentionally withheld. The hearing dragged on for hours. By the end, I was drained, my body heavy with the weight of it all. The judge didn't give a ruling that day. He said he would take time to review. I walked out into the spring air, my heart pounding. Mom followed me outside. Her face was pale, her eyes wet. Jess, why are you doing this? Because someone has to, I said. My voice cracked. Because Granddad deserved better. Because I deserved better. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. You could have stood up for me years ago, Mom. You never did. Her lips trembled. She didn't answer. Weeks passed before the decision came. When the letter arrived in my mailbox, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope. My hands shook as I tore it open. The judge's words blurred at first, but then sharpened. While the court cannot retroactively change the primary beneficiary designation, it finds that sufficient evidence exists to recognize Jessica Morgan as an heir to the legacy of service represented by the pension. A portion of the survivor benefits will be redirected to her in acknowledgement of her own service and the intent expressed by her grandfather's records. I gasped. Tears spilled down my cheeks. It wasn't everything, but it was something. More than I expected. Enough to prove that my father's decision wasn't the last word. When Ryan found out, he exploded. He left me a voicemail, his voice shaking with fury. You think this makes you better? You'll regret this, Jess. You've ruined us. But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Because it wasn't about ruining anyone. It was about reclaiming what was mine, not the money, but the honor. That night, I pulled out my grandfather's jacket from the trunk. I slipped it on, the fabric loose on my shoulders, the scent of mothballs and time filling my lungs. I stood in front of the mirror, saluting my reflection. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished. Because reclaiming honor was one thing. Learning how to live with the wreckage of a broken family was another. And that battle was only beginning. The court's decision should have felt like a victory, but when the papers arrived and the dust settled, I was left with silence. Not triumphant silence, not peaceful silence, just the hollow quiet of a family that no longer spoke to me. Mom stopped calling. Ryan blocked my number. Melanie only sent one message after the ruling. You've gone too far. Don't contact us again. For a while, I carried their absence like another deployment rucksack. Heavy, unrelenting, but familiar. I'd lived without them before. I'd live without them again. But late at night, in the thin hours when sleep slipped away, I caught myself wondering, had I destroyed everything just to win a piece of paper? Had I turned truth into a weapon so sharp it cut through my own blood ties? I didn't have the answer. So I went back to what I knew best. The uniform. Every morning, I laced up my boots and felt the weight of discipline return. I threw myself into drills, missions, assignments. My body hardened again, my focus narrowed. But no matter how much I tried to bury myself in the rhythm of military life, the ache remained. One day, Captain Harris pulled me aside. Morgan, he said, his voice steady, you've got a storm in you. Use it or it'll use you. What do you mean? He studied me, eyes sharp. I've seen soldiers like you, carrying battles from home into the field. Sometimes it makes them unstoppable. Sometimes it breaks them. The choice is yours. His words struck deep. Because I knew he was right. I needed to decide. Was I going to let betrayal define me, or was I going to let it fuel something greater? The answer came weeks later, at a community veterans event where I'd been invited to speak. I stood at the podium, staring out at rows of faces, old men in faded caps, women with silver hair and proud eyes, young recruits barely out of high school. My palms sweated, my throat tightened. I wasn't sure I had the strength to tell this story again. But then I remembered Ethan's salute, that single, defiant gesture in a room full of laughter. And I began. I told them about the wedding, about my father's words, about the humiliation that burned into my skin. I told them about finding my grandfather's trunk, about the letters that begged for a legacy to be carried forward. I told them about fighting for the pension not for money, but for meaning. When I finished, the room was silent. Then slowly people began to rise. Applause thundered through the hall, louder than any drill sergeant shout, louder than my father's cruel laughter. I gripped the podium, tears streaming down my face. For the first time, I felt the truth settle inside me. I hadn't lost my family. I had found a new one. Afterward, an old veteran approached me. His hands shook as he placed a medal into my palm. "Your grandfather gave this to me once," he said. "Said I'd know who to pass it on to when the time came. It's yours now." I stared at the medal, my chest aching. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice in a courtroom. It was something purer, recognition. A thread stitched across generations, finally finding its way back to me. Driving home that night, I pulled over at the cemetery. I knelt by my grandfather's grave, the medal clutched in my hand. "Granddad," I whispered, "I hope I did right by you. I hope I carried what you wanted me to carry." The wind rustled the leaves, cool and steady. I stayed there for a long time, until the stars dotted the sky. In the months that followed, I stopped waiting for calls that would never come. I stopped rereading old texts, stopped replaying Dad's laughter in my head. My family's silence hurt, but it no longer defined me, because I had built something stronger. I became a mentor to younger soldiers, especially the women who came in wide-eyed and uncertain, just like I once was. I told them the truths no one had told me, that they were enough, that they were stronger than the voices that doubted them, that family could fail you, but the uniform never would. Each time I spoke those words, I felt lighter, as if I wasn't just healing myself, but passing on a shield to protect others from the wounds I had carried. And still, sometimes in the quiet, I thought of Dad. I wondered if, in those final moments, when his eyes clouded and his breath grew shallow, he had realized what he had done. I wondered if regret had settled in his chest like an anchor. I would never know. And maybe that was the point, because my story wasn't about him anymore.
It was about me.
About a girl who had once been laughed at in front of 100 people, frozen with shame, wondering if she was enough. About a woman who stood in court, in uniform, demanding that the truth be heard. About a soldier who finally understood that hacking military life wasn't about surviving drills or carrying packs. It was about carrying yourself when no one else would. That was the real victory. Not the pension. Not the ruling. Not even the applause. It was standing tall in the mirror, saluting myself, knowing that I had done more than hack it. I had lived it. I had owned it. And though my father's voice would always echo somewhere in the background, it was no longer louder than mine, because the last word belonged to me.